Good afternoon. This is Celia Lacayo with Social Science. I am the Associate Director of Community Engagement, and I also teach in the departments of African American Studies, Chicano, and Central American Studies here at UCLA. So today we are continuing our Rising Scholar series, and today we have with us Josefina Flores Morales. Hi, Josefina. How are you today?
Hi, Celia. Thank you for having me. I'm doing great.
Wonderful. So, Josefina is a PhD candidate in the sociology department, and she has written and co authored an amazing article entitled, Of Course We Need to Help the Undocumented Immigrants, Twitter Discourse on the Undeservingness of Undocumented Immigrants in the United States During the COVID Pandemic. So before we launch into that, we want to see and talk about your general interest. So can you tell us what your current and future research in general is, Josefina?
Of course. So, broadly, I am a sociologist with interests in race and ethnicity, immigration, and social demography. And my broader research agenda encompasses two main outcomes. The first is health outcomes of immigrants and minorities in the United States. And the second outcome focuses on socioeconomic outcomes like wealth, education, and income. And one of the angles of my research is that I aim to understand the life course of immigrants, so the health and socioeconomic outcomes of folks during childhood, adulthood, and then into older age as well. So I'm interested broadly in the whole life course and how immigration status in particular creates diverging experiences for immigrant communities with the focus on Latinx folks within the States.
Wonderful, very comprehensive research. So we'll get underway in the specific article. Can you let us know what is the main argument here in this article and how does it differ from previous research?
Great question. So, the article's main argument is that pro immigrant discourse on social media, meaning the way that people support immigrants, specifically undocumented immigrants, in the context of need and rights, is one that often has a capitalistic and neoliberal kind of undertone, in that although people may say pro immigrant, discourses and claim to be pro-immigrant, sometimes those same narratives have implications that undermine immigrant rights. And overall, it's a little distinct from previous work that has focused on the frames of deservingness of immigrants in the United States, in that it situates the discourse within the pandemic. So it helps us better understand how the context, both the political and public health context, are also embedded in the stories that we tell about pro immigrant discourse.
And we see that you're specifically looking at the discourse through the social media platform of Twitter. Tell us more about these methods that you employed in this project.
So, this project entirely relies on Twitter data. And the way that I obtain Twitter data is through web scraping using R. Nowadays, it's very accessible to obtain thousands of tweets in a matter of seconds. So, with the advent of big data, I was able to collect and begin to collect Twitter data starting from about March of 2020 up through this summer. And my collaborator, Fanny Farrago, helped me qualitatively code over, we had a sample of over 12,000 not interviews, Twitter data, over 12,000 tweets. And from those tweets, we randomly selected a subsample that we were each going to qualitatively code. And by that, we mean categorizing these tweets into first, whether they were pro immigrant or anti immigrant. And all of the tweets we collected had the word undocumented or undocumented immigrants within them. And after we had categorized the pro immigrant tweets from the anti immigrant ones, we started to parse out the differences within each of those groups. And what we found through the qualitative coding was that there were variations among pro immigrant tweets. And so the qualitative methods and the data we had really helped us kind of see the forest from the trees at the macro perspective. Like, what are people talking about in relation to undocumented immigrants during the COVID pandemic? And it allowed us to see the themes that emerged in how people come into the defense of immigrants on social media.
And along those lines with many of the key and nuanced findings, any findings in particular as to how specifically COVID impacted the tweets, similar or different from prior narratives?
Yes, that's a fantastic question. So previous research on immigrant discourse and frames of deservingness had found, and several articles and books I think exist on the topic of the fact that when we defend immigrants, specifically undocumented ones, that we're often saying, they deserve rights because they're economic actors who contribute to the economy. So we knew that already before, and our data both reinforced this theme in the previous literature and also added on the extra layer, because something that was quite unique about the tweets during the pandemic was that the narrative also became, we need to support the undocumented immigrants because they are the essential workers, right? So because not only they contribute to the economy, but because they're also on the front lines in the high-risk occupations during COVID that we know are associated with excess mortality, specifically in the Latinx communities. Those were kind of the undertones, as opposed to saying, this is a public health issue. We all need to take care of each other and our humanity and our dignity. And so one of the things that was really striking about the tweets is that the narratives were that if undocumented immigrants were contributing to these high-risk essential jobs, then they were worthy of care and of rights. But what that logic is missing is that because of those essential jobs, we lost a lot of undocumented folks and Latinx folks. So, these are some of the things that aren't really seen in those narratives that only focus on the economic contributions of immigrants, which come at a cost.
And lastly, this is really relative. This is very relevant research in current time. Tell us what this means in terms of the impact on the Latinx community and the greater society.
So currently, the undocumented population within the United States, a good proportion of them are Latinx, but we also see other growing ethnic minorities like Asian groups that are also a growth within the undocumented population. And I think issues like who deserves rights, when they deserve them, and under which circumstances, they're really important to consider, because it's also the way that policymakers and broadly public opinion is also shaped. So when we think about the discourses around immigrant rights and undocumented young people and the dreamers, right, there's also narratives and frames of deservingness that make a marked difference between those that are deemed worthy of saving and those that are not. And so similarly, the paper that's published in Sociological Perspectives with my co-author Fanny Farrago on Twitter discourse captures a similar thing, right? When we make the distinctions between the immigrants that are contributing economically or as essential workers versus those that are not, we're creating distinctions based on ability, likely based on age, on informal versus formal work, and it creates kind of gradations of exclusion even in the way that we talk. So it's highly relevant for Latinx communities, but also other minoritized groups, because it basically apportions rights in a sense.
This is really great article, and I hope everybody gets to read it, along with all the other work that Josefina is doing. So again, this is the Young Rising Scholars at UCLA. Please make sure to subscribe. And this is Celia Lacayo with LA Social Science, and we'll meet up next time. Thank you.